Hey, first, I want you to know, I see how that feels. Getting ghosted after sex isn't just awkward or rude. It cuts in a way that leaves you replaying every moment, wondering what you missed or what you did wrong. That ache is confusing, lonely, and it messes with your sense of worth, and you don't deserve to be left holding the questions. So here's what this video is. It's a clear, no-fluff look at what's actually going on in a man's head when he disappears after being intimate. I'm not here to make excuses for him, and I'm not here to tell you to blame yourself. I want to give you real, practical understanding, the kinds that help you spot patterns, protect your heart, and make smarter choices next time. Because knowing why someone ghosts doesn't fix being ghosted, but it stops you from turning their silence into your fault. We'll walk through the main psychological reasons this happens. This is about reclaiming calm after confusion, about turning a painful mystery into clear facts you can use. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go. Section 1. The emotional disconnection factor. See, for many women, intimacy tends to carry layers. It's not just physical release, it's closeness, it's connection, it's the beginning of bonding. Even if you went in telling yourself, this is casual, I'm not catching feelings, the body doesn't always listen to that. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, floods the system after intimacy. That's why cuddling, holding, even just lying in bed with someone after sex can feel deeply connecting. It's biology reinforcing the idea of closeness. But here's where the disconnect happens. Not everyone experiences that flood of emotion in the same way. For some men, sex is compartmentalized. It's like a box they can open and close without it bleeding into other parts of their life. They can be attracted to you, enjoy the moment, feel pleasure, and then, mentally, shut the lid once it's over. To them, it was just an experience, not a signal of deeper attachment. And this is where women often get caught off guard. Because you might assume that the intensity of that night, the kisses, the chemistry, the shared vulnerability meant you were both stepping into a new stage. But in his mind, it might not have symbolized anything beyond the act itself. It's not that he's deliberately tricking you. It's that his mental and emotional framework around sex is different from yours. Psychologists call this psychological distancing. It's when someone deliberately or unconsciously keeps emotional walls up around intimate experiences. Some men adopt a casual mindset where sex is an activity, not a commitment. In fact, many men are socialized from a young age to treat sex as achievement rather than connection. They're praised for the quantity of partners, not the quality of relationships. That conditioning trains the brain to strip emotion away from physical intimacy. Now, contrast that with an attached mindset. This is when intimacy naturally deepens feelings. In an attached mindset, physical closeness reinforces emotional closeness. So sex becomes a bridge to something deeper. It feels like evidence of trust, chemistry, maybe even future potential. When someone in this mindset meets someone in a casual mindset, that's when the pain of ghosting gets magnified. One person thinks, we just got closer, while the other thinks, that was fun, but now I'm done. And here's the thing. Sex doesn't always mean bonding for both sides. It doesn't automatically equal, he likes me more now. For some men, the climax itself is the finish line, not the starting point. That's why you might notice a sharp shift in behavior right after intimacy. He was texting constantly before, he seemed emotionally available during, but afterward, the texts slow down, the energy cools, and eventually, he might disappear completely. It's not always about you. It's about the way he interprets sex in his own head. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine two people eating the same meal. For one person, it's comfort food. It brings back memories. It makes them feel warm and cared for. For the other person, it's just calories. Same action, two very different internal experiences. That's what sex can be like. One of you is attaching deeper meaning. The other is just moving through the motions. And I want to make things clear here, because this is where a lot of women start blaming themselves. They think, if I'd waited longer, maybe he wouldn't have ghosted. If I'd done something differently, maybe he'd see me as more than a hookup. But the truth is, if a man is in that compartmentalized, emotionally disconnected mindset, the timing doesn't matter. Whether you waited 1 week or 6 months, he was never going to interpret intimacy as a sign of deeper commitment. That's his wiring, his lens, not your failure. So what does this mean for you in practice? It means you can't assume sex equals security. You can't assume physical closeness automatically translates to emotional closeness in his head. The best way to protect yourself is to gauge where his mindset is before intimacy happens. Does he talk about connection? About wanting something real? Or does he shy away from deeper conversations, keep things light, and focus mostly on the physical? His patterns before you get intimate usually reveal how he'll behave after. Section 2. Avoidance and conflict aversion. Instead of facing the discomfort of an honest conversation, some men choose silence. Now, think about it. For a lot of people, confrontation is scary. Telling someone, hey, I'm not interested in seeing you again, feels awkward, heavy, and even guilt-inducing. So, instead of choosing honesty, they choose disappearance. It's easier to vanish than to risk hurting someone's feelings, or, let's be real, to avoid feeling like the bad guy themselves. Psychologists call this an avoidant coping style. It's the tendency to deal with stress by running away from it instead of addressing it head-on. People who lean on avoidance convince themselves that silence is less cruel than rejection. But in reality, it leaves the other person with unanswered questions, and the pain of that uncertainty often cuts deeper than a clean rejection would have. When it comes to dating, this avoidance is amplified after sex. Why? Because intimacy raises expectations. Even if you never said you wanted a relationship, even if you both went in knowing it was casual, there's still an unspoken shift. The dynamic feels heavier. And for a man who doesn't want things to escalate, that weight can feel threatening. Instead of having the courage to say, I don't see this going anywhere, he takes what feels like the easy road, ghosting. Here's the truth. Ghosting is rarely about you not being good enough. More often, it's about his discomfort with honesty. Think of it like this. He knows saying goodbye face to face requires vulnerability, clarity, and a willingness to be accountable. Ghosting, on the other hand, requires nothing but silence. To someone with an avoidant mindset, silence feels safer than the risk of emotional mess. And I want you to really hear this part. Avoidance is not strength. Avoidance is not maturity. Ghosting is not the mark of a man who knows what he wants. It's the mark of a man who struggles to deal with human feelings in a direct way. Mature men may not always want the same things you do, but they'll communicate it. They'll say, I had a good time, but I don't think we're aligned long term. That honesty might sting, but it also gives you dignity and closure. Ghosting, by contrast, strips you of that dignity and leaves you in limbo. Now, here's where psychology digs deeper. Many avoidant men grew up learning that emotions are unsafe. Maybe they were raised in environments where feelings were dismissed or vulnerability was punished. So as adults, when they sense conflict, like the possibility of you asking, where is this going, they default to running. It's not an excuse, but it does explain why some men disappear instead of stepping up. And you'll notice a pattern if you pay attention. Men who ghost after sex often show signs of avoidance before intimacy. They dodge deeper questions, they keep things surface level. They might joke about commitment in a dismissive way, or they avoid labeling what you have. That's not chill energy. That's emotional evasion. If you see it early, it's a warning sign. Section 3. The ego and validation dynamic. Here's the raw truth. For some men, sex isn't about closeness. It's about validation. It's about ego. It's about being able to say to themselves, I can still pull. I can still attract. I can still win. In those moments, you're not being seen as a full, complex human being. You're being reduced to a mirror that reflects his desirability back to him. And once he gets that reflection, the chase is over. The dopamine hit, that chemical rush that comes with pursuit and conquest, fades fast. This is why you'll sometimes notice that a man was extremely attentive, charming, and eager before sex, but distant or gone after. It's not that you changed, it's that his internal motivation did. The chase fed his ego, the intimacy sealed it. And once his ego got fed, he no longer had the drive to stick around. Psychologically, this is tied to something we might call the validation loop. A man who leans on external validation, meaning he gets his sense of worth from how others respond to him, will keep seeking experiences that reinforce his desirability. Sex, in this context, isn't bonding. It's a scorecard. It's reassurance that he's still attractive, still powerful, still good enough. Here's the catch, though. This has nothing to do with you not being valuable enough. In fact, many times men chase women who shine bright precisely because being chosen by you gives them a bigger ego boost. But when a man is motivated by validation rather than connection, intimacy doesn't deepen his interest, it satisfies it. Once that need is filled, he may pull away. Because sticking around would mean he'd now have to show up emotionally. And that was never his goal. And here's where the post-sex clarity effect comes in. For some men, the high of pursuit is intoxicating. But once they climax, the dopamine drops, and reality sets in. They might suddenly feel less drawn, not because you lost value, but because their chemical drive settled down. In their heads, that drop translates into disinterest, and instead of working through it like adults, they vanish. Let me make this really clear. Being ghosted by a man like this does not mean you weren't enough. If anything, it often means you were more than he was ready to handle. Men who thrive on validation aren't equipped for depth. They want the spark without the responsibility. They want the win without the work. Here's the advice piece. Stop measuring your worth by whether a man stayed after sex. If he left, it says far more about his hunger for validation than it does about your desirability. Your value isn't proven by someone's ability to stay. It's inherent. And the men worth your time are the ones who see you as more than a mirror for their ego. Think of it like this. If he only saw you as a prize to win, then disappearing after sex is his way of revealing the truth about his intentions. Painful as that is, it's also clarity. It frees you from pouring energy into someone who wasn't capable of seeing your full worth in the first place. So instead of asking, why wasn't I enough to keep him, shift the question to, why would I want someone who only stayed long enough to feed his ego? That reframe puts the power back in your hands, and that's where it belongs. Section 4. Fear of commitment or escalation. For a lot of men, sex is not just physical. They know, consciously or unconsciously, that for many women, intimacy signals a shift. It can imply that things are moving towards something more serious. Not marriage tomorrow, not kids next week, but a step forward. And for a man who feels anxious about attachment, that sense of next step can be terrifying. This is where psychology gives us the concept of anticipatory avoidance. It's the habit of running away from situations before they have a chance to get deeper. In other words, ghosting before things escalate. So instead of saying, I'm not ready for something serious, he vanishes. Because in his mind, vanishing is safer than being honest. Think about how this plays out. Before sex, he's present, attentive, sometimes even affectionate. He might even say things that sound like commitment. I really like spending time with you. I feel like we click, and so on. But once sex happens, his fear kicks in. He starts imagining unspoken expectations. Maybe you'll want more time together. Maybe you'll expect exclusivity. Maybe you'll see it as a step toward a relationship. And instead of talking about it like an adult, he cuts out. Now, let me be very clear. This isn't your fault. His fear of escalation is not proof that you were too much or that you moved too fast. It's about his internal wiring. Many men carry what psychologists call an avoidant attachment style. These are men who crave closeness but panic when it actually shows up. They like the idea of intimacy, but when intimacy threatens to anchor them, they pull away. Sex, in this sense, becomes the trigger and makes everything feel too real, too fast. And here's the painful irony. Sometimes, the more he likes you, the scarier it feels to him. If he only saw you as a casual fling, he might hang around longer because the stakes feel low. But if he senses that you could mean more, and he knows deep down he's not ready for more, The fear of commitment makes him run even quicker. It's twisted, but it happens. Let's also talk about culture here. Many men are raised to equate freedom with masculinity. To them, commitment feels like losing independence, like handing over control. So even the possibility of a relationship after sex feels suffocating, not because you're demanding it, but because of what they've been taught commitment represents. Ghosting, in their mind, is like slipping out before the walls close in. 5. Immaturity and emotional underdevelopment. Here's what I mean. Emotional maturity isn't about how many years someone has lived. It's about how they handle responsibility, communication, and other people's feelings. A mature man knows that when he's not interested anymore, the respectful thing is to say so. It may feel awkward, but he steps into that discomfort because he understands that honesty is part of treating someone with dignity. An immature man, on the other hand, avoids that responsibility. He ghosts because it saves him from having to grow up in that moment. Think of ghosting like a shortcut. It lets him skip the work of being honest. And immature men love shortcuts. They want the benefits of intimacy without the accountability that comes with it. They want the fun of sex without the honesty of saying, "I'm not ready for more." That's why ghosting feels so natural to them. It matches their underdeveloped emotional skills. Psychologists sometimes describe this as low relational competence. That's just a fancy way of saying they don't know how to handle relationships in a healthy, adult way. They may avoid conflict, dodge hard conversations, and choose selfish comfort over mutual respect. And if you've been ghosted by someone like this, I want you to hear me clearly. This isn't about your worth. It's about his lack of capacity. Let's break this down further. A man with emotional underdevelopment usually shows certain patterns. He may be inconsistent hot one day, cold the next. He may show a player mindset, focused more on fun and instant gratification than on building anything solid. He may even act out of impulse, not thinking about how his actions affect the other person. These are all signs of someone who hasn't done the inner work of growing past selfishness. And here's the painful reality. Immaturity doesn't automatically get fixed with time. There are men in their 40s and 50s still ghosting, still dodging accountability, because they never chose to develop emotionally. So don't fall into the trap of thinking, if he's older, he must be ready. No, read his actions, not his age. Let me give you a simple contrast. A mature man might not want to continue after sex, but he'll communicate it directly. "I don't see this turning into something long-term, but I respect you enough to say it out loud." That stings, but it gives you closure and lets you walk away with your dignity intact. An immature man, he'll just vanish, because he cares more about avoiding discomfort than about giving you clarity. That's the difference. 6. Shame, guilt, and internal conflict. Not every man ghosts because he's cold, immature, or chasing validation. Sometimes, the silence comes from a place you wouldn't expect shame. Yes, shame, guilt, internal conflict. And though that doesn't make ghosting okay, it helps explain another layer of why this happens. Here's the thing. Sex can bring up insecurity. For some men, the moment the passion fades, self-doubt comes rushing in. Maybe he wasn't happy with his own performance. Maybe he feels he crossed a line with himself, like he said he wasn't looking for anything serious, but then acted in a way that looked serious. Or maybe, deep down, he feels guilt about how casually he's treating intimacy. That guilt is uncomfortable, and instead of sitting in it, he chooses the easiest way out, disappearing. Let me pause and say this clearly. His shame is not your burden. If a man ghosts because he feels embarrassed, guilty, or conflicted, that's still his choice. But it's important to understand that ghosting can sometimes be less about dismissing you and more about avoiding his own reflection in the mirror. Think about how shame works. Shame says, "I don't want to face what this says about me." It's a heavy emotion that makes people hide. And hiding can look like withdrawal. It can look like retreating into silence, avoiding your calls, avoiding accountability. Ghosting, in this case, is his way of running from himself as much as from you. Here's an example. Imagine a man who was raised with strict beliefs about sex. Maybe religious, maybe cultural, maybe just values he absorbed growing up. He tells himself intimacy should only happen in certain contexts, but then he goes against that. The next day, instead of owning his choice, he ghosts not because you did something wrong, but because every message from you reminds him of the guilt he's trying to escape. Or think about the man who prides himself on being in control. After sex, he realizes he felt more vulnerable than he expected. Maybe you saw a softer side of him. Maybe he felt a level of closeness that scared him. That exposure triggers shame. I let someone see too much. Instead of sitting with that vulnerability, he slams the door shut. Ghosting becomes his shield. This is what psychologists sometimes call defense through withdrawal. It's when someone defends themselves against uncomfortable emotions by retreating instead of confronting. And while that might protect his ego, it leaves you in confusion and pain. So how do you respond and protect yourself? Because while understanding him gives you clarity, protecting yourself gives you power. Here's the first truth. You cannot control whether someone ghosts. You can be kind, beautiful, intelligent, and deeply giving, and still, if a man is wired to vanish, he will vanish. His choice says everything about where he is and nothing about your worth. So the goal isn't to twist yourself into someone who can prevent ghosting. The goal is to build boundaries that protect your peace, no matter what someone else does. Start with this. Pay attention before intimacy. Look at how he shows up when there's no physical reward on the line. Is he consistent with his words and actions? Does he respect your time, keep his promises, and engage with your mind? Or is his energy mostly flirtation, surface-level attention, and rushing things forward? A man's behavior before sex almost always foreshadows his behavior after. Believe the patterns you see. Second, know what intimacy means to you. If sex feels deeply bonding for you, and let's be honest, for most women, biology makes it that way, then honor that. Don't downplay it to match someone else's casual script. Don't lie to yourself with, I can do this, and not care. If you know in your soul that intimacy leaves you vulnerable. Protecting yourself means aligning your actions with your truth, not with the pressure of the culture or the man in front of you. Third, set boundaries unapologetically. That doesn't mean giving a lecture on date one. It means being clear about your standards in the way you live and communicate. If a man pushes for intimacy before showing you consistency, you have every right to slow it down. If a man avoids conversations about what he's looking for, you have every right to take that as your answer. Silence is clarity. Evasion is clarity. Don't beg for words, read the actions. Fourth, if you do end up being ghosted, resist the spiral of self-blame. The silence will tempt you to invent stories. Maybe I wasn't attractive enough. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I gave in too soon. Stop. His disappearance is not proof of your failure. It's proof of his inability to face honesty. Instead of replaying the night in your head, replay this truth. A man who ghosts was never ready to meet you at the level you deserve. And finally, shift your focus forward. Ghosting hurts because it leaves a hole where clarity should be, but you don't heal by chasing after answers from him. You heal by giving yourself the closure he refused to give. That looks like saying to yourself, I didn't lose value, I gained knowledge. I now know he wasn't capable of giving me what I need. That's closure. That's how you take back your power. Remember, protecting yourself isn't about building walls so high that no one can get close. It's about having the wisdom to recognize who is safe to let in. You don't need every man to stay. You just need the right man, the one who sees intimacy not as a game or a conquest or an escape, but as a space of honesty and respect. So the next time you face that temptation to think, if only I'd done something differently, maybe he wouldn't have ghosted, I want you to flip the script. Ask instead, why would I ever want to keep someone who chose silence over respect? That's how you protect your heart. That's how you grow stronger, softer, and wiser all at once. Because at the end of the day, you can't stop ghosting from existing, but you can stop it from stealing your worth.